of you have grown up with game shows like The Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy. I think every time I turn the TV on, it's amazing to see how many of these shows are still running today. And I think part of their lasting appeal is we can feel like, we're participating right on the show along with all the other contestants. Well, today, you're not going to be competing with game show contestants. Instead, you're going to become game show contestants. We're going to kick things off with one of my favorite shows, Family Feud. For those of you who don't know the rules, I'm going to ask a question, and then all of you, as the contestants, have to guess which are the most popular answers. For example, I might ask, which animal makes the best pet? And you'll have to respond quickly and correctly. Now, since we're over Zoom, everyone's going to be competing as one giant team. So the only thing you really win here are some more points for the rest of the team. But once I ask the question, everyone's invited to respond by typing your answer into the chat feature below. I'll take answers in the order they come up. So again, speed is important. I'll give you all a moment to get your chat boxes open here. And while you're doing that, I want to let you know that for the sake of time, out of the 8 possible answers on the board, you only have to answer 3 correctly. However, if you've seen the show, an incorrect answer results in a strike. And 3 strikes, well, I think that part's pretty self-explanatory. So what are we waiting for? Guys, gals, non-binary pals, let's play the Family Feud. Okay, remember, be ready to type your answers as soon as I finish asking our first question. Here we go. What is something people expect or assume about men? Go. Let's see what answers come up. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, we got all right, so the first one I'm going to go with that I've seen is strength. Let's see. Let me look at my answers. Okay. You know what? Does that go with... Okay, I'm going to take strength and tough as 2 different answers. I don't know. Maybe they're the same. All right, well, let's go with strength. Is strength on the board? Oh, well, that is true, though. I think that is one still that's often associated. All right, the next one we had was tough. Survey says, is tough on the board? All right, we got one there. Let's see what next. Oh, here's a good one. Low voices. Is low voices on the board? Oh, okay. Let's keep going, though. Don't give up. All right. Masculine. I'm looking at my answers here. Is masculine on the board? Oh, that's okay. All of those are definitely things that are expected or assumed of men, though. But let's see what the remaining answers were. Breadwinner. Somebody did say that. Providers. That was the next one. Let's see what's else. Knowledge of cars and trucks. Better at math. Aggressive or assertive. Fix and build things. Like the color blue. And natural leaders. All right. So that we got one under our belts. This was good. I'm going to give you all another chance, though, especially since that round didn't go the way we hoped. So let's try it one more time. Okay, here we go. Now that we've got a feel for how this works, get ready. What is something people expect or assume about women? Go. Okay, let's see where we... Okay, so the first one I have is kind. And is it on the board? Survey says... Well, that is still a lot of these answers. Remember, there's only 8, so I would still say that very much counts. Okay. Nurturing. Let's see, is nurturing on the board? Survey says... Oh. Okay. These next two I'm going to count together. Soft and sensitive. Are those on the board? Well, and or does that kind of count with the last one? You know, I feel like some of these go. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to put a couple of these together. I'm going to count this next one. That would be emotional. Maybe not. Maybe that's actually more of a negative and not so caring. But let's try the next one. I see on here motherly and caretakers. I think this goes with this one. Survey says homemaker, although there's a lot of other things that go into that. Let's see what else we have. Gail said pretty. Do we have pretty on the board? Survey says... Okay, thin, attractive. Oh, and I do see emotions before, so I guess we covered that one too. Let's see. I'm going down the list. We've got a lot of similar ones. Ooh, okay. The next one I see is mother. Is mother on the board? Wants children. Let's see what else we have. Makeup. Is makeup on the board? Oh, okay. Well, that's okay. Let's see what the rest of our answers were here. Creative careers. Submissive. Gossip. Drama. Like pink. So I guess that goes along with like blue from the men before. We have lots of great answers that came in, though, and plenty more that I think are actually more accurate than the ones we had on this. But here's a bonus question for all of you. How many of you have felt some of these assumptions, either the ones on the board or the ones that people shared? How many of you have felt these expectations or assumptions placed on you at some point in your life? Maybe you even felt the need to live up to some of them. Words can hold a lot of power over people. Think about what it feels like to be told, I love you, or to be given a compliment. And now think of what it feels like to be told, I hate you, or receive an insult. Words can comfort us, and they can also hurt us. Words can unsettle and challenge us. I suspect maybe some of you were already unsettled or challenged by some of the language in today's service, particularly the use of the word queer. All of us have different relationships with it. For some, this word has been used to harm and demean, perhaps by people around you, or against you, or even by you. For others, the word has been reclaimed as a source of identity and empowerment. There are so many uses for this word that today I'd like to offer us a starting point. An article by Dr. Charlie Glickman offers the word queer as a verb. You might have read this if you saw the bulletin or the very first slide in today's service. He says to queer something, whether it's a text, a story, or an identity, is to take a look at its foundations and question them. We can explore its limits, its biases, and its boundaries. We can look for places where there's elasticity, or discover ways we can transform it into something new. To queer is to examine our assumptions and decide which of them we want to keep, change, discard, or play with. This becomes a practice in transcending the habit of settling for predefined categories and creating new ones. And even when we leave something unchanged, we have changed our relationship to it. And based on that, we might also picture what it means to describe something as queer, or for someone to claim queer as their identity. But I assume most of you didn't come here today to ponder this word, but to encounter the presence of Christ in some form or another. Well, it just so happens when we look at the biblical accounts of Jesus' life, there might not be a more perfect description of them than queer. I don't even have to stray from the last few weeks of readings that we've heard in church. A few weeks ago, Reverend Jill preached about Jesus' encounter with some fishermen, Simon and James and John. And this Jesus encounter is already impressive, hearing they went from catching absolutely no fish to catching more fish than they could possibly handle. But it's the change in these fishermen that really wows me. Simon is so amazed by this miracle that he can only see himself as a sinner, unworthy of being in Jesus' presence. And yet Jesus calls him to the task of fishing for people instead. And all three men decide to just leave their entire lives behind and follow him. What about Reverend Chris's sermon from last week? Tons of people have come to be healed by Jesus and hear him speak. And he describes for them his view of the world. When does he say we should consider ourselves blessed? When we're poor, or hungry, or weeping, or hated by others? And when should we consider ourselves unfortunate? When we're rich, or full, or laughing, and when everyone speaks well of us? Looking back at our working definition of queer, I'd love to offer an opportunity for all of you to share where you see queerness at work in those biblical accounts. If you'd like, you can unmute yourself and chime in, or you can write something down in the chat, whatever you prefer. Does anyone have somewhere based on this where they might see this at work in either of those two stories?
Well, I would say that by saying Jesus really predefined categories, redefined, not pre, but redefined categories by saying, the poor and the sick and the lonely are the blessed ones.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bettina. Anybody else? Yeah, like Bettina said, I think Rosa, yes, she wrote in the chat, I see it often with administrations politically. I think there's a lot of different parts in our lives where we are trying to challenge the way things have been done before. I'll give just a moment in case anybody else has anything they want to share on that. Oh, yep. And Teresa said, yes, Jesus was turning upside down our understandings, making us think deeply upon whom we should extend blessing and where we should look to bless one another. Absolutely.
And just to add a little piece upon that, I feel like in these stories, Jesus is really asking us to look at things from many different sides, like take your whatever's going on and just walk around it, walk in somebody else's shoes. I feel like there's that little piece that these stories encourage me to do, is to take a different look, a different view of the world. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, if anything, all these different stories, even, even in the story of the fisherman there, the fact that, Simon feels unworthy of being in Jesus' presence, and yet he's one of the ones that Jesus calls. I think we see these patterns repeated over and over a lot of the times throughout the Bible. There's an author and an Episcopal priest named J. Emerson Johnson. He said that Jesus calls us to live lives that fit this very definition by eating with the wrong kind of people and perhaps overturning the tables of profiteering that exploit the poor, to live queerly enough to make others wonder whether we might be drunk, or to stand accused of turning the world upside down. All of these examples we hear in the Bible. So based on what we've all said, if Jesus himself calls us to look at the world through a queer lens, is it fair to say that Christianity does too? I mean, we're taught to be in the world, but not of it. We seek to build a community with and learn from those who have different opinions than ourselves, not just those who share our views. In a world of science, we hunger for answers and definitive proof of things. But as Christians, we also enter into a relationship with a God we can never fully know. Queerness, as we understand it here, is a rejection of rigid definitions, which is exactly what the rituals, symbolism, and theology of the church aims to do. Their purpose is to point us in the direction of God, but not to idolize them to the point that they become God themselves. The gospel reading assigned in today's lectionary is another example of being called to live queerly in the world. It's one of Jesus' most famous commands and also one of his hardest. Continuing from where Reverend Chris left off last week, Jesus now says, "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. And pray for those who mistreat you. When they slap you on one cheek, turn and give them the other. When they take your coat, let them have your shirt as well. Give to all who beg from you. When someone takes what is yours, don't demand it back." Man, I just have to say, I am glad that God is not keeping a checklist of all the times I have failed to do these very things. I mean, the advice, when you read it, it just sounds impossible. Especially with some, if someone slaps me, my first instinct is not to, let them get in another shot at me. At best, I'm tempted to utter some words that aren't usually acceptable in a sermon. And if someone steals my stuff, you better believe I'm going to demand it back. I mean, when I read things like this is why I sometimes tell people, if you want a comfortable religion, don't follow Jesus. In the same gospel passage, Jesus gives us the golden rule, right? Do to others what you would have them do to you. As a kid, this sounded like the simplest advice in the world. Until I got older and I realized that I also had to act this way to the people who didn't want to follow the golden rule. Now there's a prayer that I came across by Dr. Niqua Walker-Barnes. She's a clinical psychologist, theologian, and minister. It would be a bit of an understatement to say that the opening of her prayer upset a lot of people. So much so that I'm pretty sure they didn't even read beyond the first paragraph. She begins her prayer by asking, "Dear God, help me to hate white people, or at least want to hate them. At least I want to stop caring about them individually and collectively." You can see how some people might tune out there. But if you push through the discomfort of these initial words and you keep reading, you hear her internal struggle. She wants to lash out at various groups of people who have caused her pain, but she repeatedly fails to see how any of that hatred will help her. Dr. Walker Barnes even asks God for a get out of judgment free card to at least make some exceptions on that whole loving your neighbor as yourself thing. But by the end of the prayer, she acknowledges that Jesus calls her down a different path. And so, as tough as it is, she says, "I pray and I press on in love." Pressing on in love when every fiber of your body would rather hate. That is the queerness of Christianity right there. That is something worth embracing. Because if we can do the difficult work of loving people when society says not to, maybe we can also start to love the parts of ourselves that we've been discouraged from loving. The woman who doesn't want children can see her life having just as much meaning as the woman who does. The man who allows himself to cry can discover there is strength behind his emotions. As Christians, we can find great inspiration in those who've already chosen to identify as queer, who refuse to live by the rigid definitions that society has tried to place on them. And in doing so, we can learn to embrace the God-given queerness in all of us. Amen.